Greetings, people who really like the accordion. If you go to my YouTube channel, Scalephrase, hit the community tab, you'll see graphic images for my amplified circle of fifths and Stradella Ranks. I made my own charts. You can right click and hit copy image or save image as so that you can save the image for yourself to use as you wish. You'll see my amplified circle of fifths image, and you'll see my Stradella Ranks chart, only it'll have different colors on the chart. Okay, it'll have different colors. You'll see that. And you'll see another chart. But the problem is, I couldn't figure out how to get this graphic on my YouTube page, so I had to put it in two pieces. This chart would be in one piece this way and then one piece this way. So each chart's in two pieces. I know that's awkward, but that's the best I could do. Now, if you've been watching the past few videos, I've been talking about the Stradella ranks, specifically the dominant rank and the diminished rank. And I've been trying to get to a point. And I think it's very, very interesting. It's an interesting perspective, and I'd like to try to get to it today if I could. Now, if you watch closely what I had to say about the chord buttons and the diminished rank, you might have felt something or noticed something. And what you'll eventually discover is with the traditional and contemporary Stradella chart, okay, traditional and contemporary, that's the one you're used to. You've seen this all over the place. There are many different versions of this. I call it my handy chart. It's hard to see and it's not clear, but this is the handy chart that you're probably familiar with. And there are several different versions of it on the internet, okay? That traditional contemporary chart is what I call heterogeneous. It's heterogeneous. In other words, it's not entirely consistent, it's not entirely accurate, and it blends two different ideas in one chart. I'll talk about that in a minute. And I've touched on this in previous videos about the diminished button rank, okay? Now, the chart that I made, my scalephrase chart, my Stradella button rank charts are homogeneous. Okay, there's a difference, and I'll show you what the difference is. My charts are uniform and consistent. Now, they might not be as easily understood as the traditional chart, but I want to show you something really nice about it, okay? Just be patient. So, on my chart, which I posted on my community tab, I call it Stradella Ranks. I have my counter bass buttons, the major chord buttons, minor chord buttons, dominant 7th chord buttons, and the diminished 7th chord buttons. Now that's hard to see, but it's clearly marked. Here's your root, your bass buttons. Okay, they go like this, counter bass, etc., etc. That's really hard to see, and I apologize. I don't know how else to present this, but this is the chart that I made, and this is homogeneous. It is complete and accurate. It's the only chart that I think is complete and accurate. The traditional contemporary charts are combinations of several different concepts. So let's take a look at that. It probably won't affect your playing of the accordion, but it's nice to know in the mind, and it's just a good bit of knowledge to have for those who are into theory, okay? Now, on the traditional contemporary chart, okay, we talked about this. If you looked at somebody's chart, let's say the one I'm holding, this is just one version, the one I'm holding, you'll see that the bass tones, right? The bass tones are not moving in fifths, intervals of fifths. See how they mix this? They have an A natural, they go to B, then they go to G flat, then down here you have, well, actually it extends from A to A sharp on the bass row. It extends from D flat to D on the counterbass row. But that is not moving precisely in intervals of fifths. So I've noticed this on most charts. If you find a chart that has your bass and counterbass buttons correctly noted, moving in fifths, and a major third apart, you say, okay, I got a chart with good bass and counterbass buttons on it. But you'll find down here on your chord button selection, you'll find that the chords are almost always notated incorrectly. For example, here you have, just as an example, an A sharp bass, and then they list the major chord tones for a B flat major. And I could go on, but I'm saying that you will find discrepancies in the traditional or contemporary Stradella handy charts, as I call it. You're going to find inconsistencies in there. And also, on the traditional chart, as I mentioned in previous videos, you'll have two different perspectives you can choose from. You'll have the diminished seventh chord button selection, or you could think of that bottom diminished rank simply and solely as a simple, plain, diminished chord. So, on the traditional chart, okay? What I'm saying is, if you have a C file here, here's your C file. Well, they give you the counterbass, they give you the C, that's your root, and then your major chord and minor chord is based precisely on the C root. All right, your seventh chord is, as I mentioned repeatedly, the seventh chord is on that C file. The fifth is missing. Okay, I talked about that. But when you get down to the diminished button rank on the accordion, instead of listing the tones as the C, that's the root, C diminished 7 chord, some people list the tones, okay, the tones found in the button as an A diminished chord. You see, I talked about this in previous videos. I talked about this repeatedly. So when they design this chart, this is hard to understand, but watch. When they design this chart, you have your counterbass, bass, major, minor, dominant 7. But when you get down to here, I don't know if you can see this. When you get down to here, the tones listed are listed as if they were a simple 3-toned diminished chord. That's the point I'm trying to make. The traditional contemporary chart is not consistent and not uniform. So in response to that dilemma, which has been going on for a long time, I made a chart. Okay, the Stradella Ranks, that's the button ranks, okay? And I just simply call them counterbass because we know that the counterbass is a major third higher than the root. We know that, everybody knows that. We have our bass rank, our major chord tones, which are very simple and very self-explanatory. You have your minor chord tones. You have your dominant 7 chord tones, and on my chart, I show clearly that the 5th tone is missing. It's missing. I show that clearly. There's no confusion, no doubt, all right? Then on the diminished 7th row, I don't list the tones that make up a simple diminished chord. I list the tones that make up the precise diminished 7, all right, this is hard to do, in that file, here's the C file, for example. So in the C file, you have correctly a C major chord, the correct tones. You have a C minor chord, the correct tones. You have a C dominant 7 with the correct tones listed. And you have a C diminished 7th with the correct tones listed. You see the correct tone for your 7th is a B double flat. The 5th is missing. All right. You have an E flat, that's your 3rd, and then you have your root. But on your traditional and contemporary charts, they don't give you the B double flat. For some reason, in the mind, they're having you at least unconsciously think of this as a simple and ordinary. I don't know if you can see it. It's hard to focus it on here. See, they have you thinking that this is a simple A diminished chord. So what that means is, if you're paying attention, this is very complicated. That means that on your traditional and contemporary charts, all right, what they're saying is you have C-based chords all the way down to the diminished, and all of a sudden they give you, in other words, let me use the other chart, all of a sudden they give you a chord that is based on, not on the C root, but on the relative minor of that C. See, here's your C, your bass button, but here is A, it's a relative minor. And they've kind of sort of mentally or unconsciously base their diminished chord on that relative minor. This is very difficult to do, trying to hold papers and do all that and explain a very complicated thing. But the point I'm making is, my chart, all right, my chart shows clearly the correct order and flow of counterbass and bass tones in fifths. Okay, it shows them correctly. We move from B double flat to A sharp in fifths. That's the whole point of the circle of fifths. To move in fifths, for God's sake. Then each chord in each file, let's say C, is a chord with the C root, and it is a correct C chord. So you see you have, again, counterbass, bass, major, minor, dominant 7, diminished 7, and the missing tones are noted clearly. That is my point, which leads to the conclusion. I know this is awkward, but this is something that no one ever fixed. No one ever fixed it and made a homogeneous, correct chart. So ultimately then, when you have your Stradella file designations, a lot of times you'll see charts that say, okay, this is the major third, and we'll call this the root or the bass. We'll call this a major chord button, minor chord button, dominant 7th chord button, and diminished 7th chord button. But if you consider what I just said, even though it sounds all messed up, if you consider it and think it through, you'll see that you actually have, and you could accurately and simply call it your counterbass rank, your bass rank, major, minor. But when you describe that dominant rank, it would be 7.05. In other words, the fifth is missing. That's how you would designate that rank. And for the bottom rank, you would designate that as a diminished 7 or diminished 7th, 0.05. In other words, the fifth is missing. This would be the accurate homogeneous way or perspective. This would be the not so accurate traditional heterogeneous perspective. And that was the whole idea of doing this series of dominant and diminished videos. I know that's really weird, but I thought it through, and I'm pleased with it. I know what tones are in each rank. I know that in each rank in my system, the scale phrase perspective, that the tones in the chord buttons are all the correct tones for the chords built on the bass note or the root, okay? I know that sounds weird, and that's the best I could do. It's complicated, and I got to wrap it up. So thanks for being patient. Think it through, and you'll see it's pretty cool. Good night.